All right. Hello. Hello. This is the My Artifact episode number 3803 maybe. Yeah. Yes, 03. Yes. 03. Today's date is 8th of January 2025. It's been almost like a night at 9:42 p.m. All right. Let's just jump into the question. Let's go. All right. Okay. The question is, what if food remember its origin? Oh, that's a really good question. All right, yeah. First of all, what exactly is this question and why am I asking this question to myself? This is what if question. Why am I asking this question to myself? What if question is always been really interested way to give the answer. It kind of like a force me to think about that reality. When I try to think about that reality or when I try to create that reality inside of my mind, I'm kind of like utilizing my knowledge, information, and experience that I've been through, and somehow it kind of like a felt good. Disclaimer: the information that I'm trying to tell you is not exactly right or is not exactly wrong either. It's a wrong, it's a raw, it's unfiltered, it's just my opinion. So do not believe in any kind of like information that I am saying, or do not seek for any kind of like information that I am saying. It's just my opinion, and opinion are subjective. Now, regarding about the question says that, okay, what if food remember its origin? Now, what exactly it means? It means that na ki a kind of like somebody imagine a kind of like a word a world where when you eat anything, you just kind of like a remember something about the origin of that food, where it came from, and things like that. Example: I just ate bharit. Okay, what's a bharit? Bharit is a kind of like an Indian cuisine, by the way. It's kind of like a made up by baigan. I don't know what is exactly the English word for baigan. Okay, yeah. So, like basically, this is kind of like a simple bharit that I ate. If you don't know bharit, just go to the Google search about bharit. Is a Maharashtrian cuisine, by the way, Indian Maharashtrian cuisine, bharit. Okay, yeah. So let's just imagine a scenario that while I was eating that bharit, I was kind of like a somebody have a um, I was kind of like a somebody like there is something really I could kind of like realize that where it came from. Like that bharit is actually came from that bangan, like a vanga, and that vanga is actually came from like a kind of like a something a food farmer or things like that. Like basically this is na ki I would kind of like a somebody like a see his origin, that ki how does that bharit is actually came in front of my plate. Okay, yeah. Like the bharit comes to vanga, like bang and vanga, yeah, those are the same things. Okay, yeah, that vanga is kind of like a came like my mother is actually bought that vanga from kind of like a something vegetable guy. Okay, yeah, that vegetable guy is actually bought that vanga from farmer. That farmer is actually kind of like a simply uh, kind of like a simply grew up that vanga in his farms and things like that. So this is what I kind of like a simply I would see while I was eating that bhari. So it would kind of like simply create the transparency regarding about that ki whatever the food that I'm eating is kind of like a legit or genuine. Okay, yeah. Now if I kind of like eat something like a wafers, let's just say that ki a kind of like a lace. Okay, yeah. So if I kind of like ate a kind of like a lace which is kind of like a wafer, then I would kind of like simply imagine, or I would kind of like simply seen that ki these are kind of like simply wafers are actually came from the factory. Okay, yeah. There are multiple processes actually happened, the conveyor belt and masalas and lot of stuff and things and that. Okay, I also kind of like see that ki those are potatoes are actually came from kind of like a farmer, which is kind of like in very huge quantity and things and that. So these are kind of like some stuff that I would kind of like imagine, or I would kind of like a scene it kind of consider that, okay, yeah, this wafer is actually came from factory made. Now I kind of like a somebody I went to kind of like a somewhere at outside, and kind of like I eat a kind of like a somebody paneer sabzi. Okay, yeah. So when I ate that paneer, I would kind of like a scene that thing that paneer is not exactly a paneer. A paneer is a kind of like a somebody synthetic paneer. It's actually kind of like a made by kind of like some chemical ingredient is actually happened, and things like that. Okay, yeah. These are not kind of like how any, like basically paneer is actually made by a kind of like somebody milk, and it's milk product. Okay, yeah, but the this adulterated paneer is not actually made by milk. It's actually made by kind of like a multiples of chemicals are actually included and things and that and that. Then I would kind of like a quickly realize that no, this is not really good thing. Okay, this paneer should supposed to be not good. I shouldn't supposed to be eat that thing. So I would call the manager. I would gonna say this thing, dude, the paneer that you are kind of like a serving is not really good. It's kind of like a somebody really wrong or adulterated. Okay, yeah. So this might be kind of like a really good. By the way, this scenario is really good. Like basically whatever the stuff that I would kind of like assembly eat, I would kind of like assembly see its origin and things like that. When this thing will gonna happen, then probably there is a lot of thing will gonna happen. The food adulteration will gonna go on. Okay, yeah, because the people are kind of like a seeing its origin. Like a when they eat anything, they kind of like a seeing the origin, that the kind of like a things are actually happen or not or stuff like that. Now these are kind of like assembly okay. Now, what if you are kind of like a try to eat chicken or mutton? Okay, yeah, I love chicken by the way. So if I kind of like a eat chicken, then what would I kind of like a see? I would see that a kind of like a somebody chicken who was kind of like a somebody I brought from that chicken store, and that particular guy who kind of like a somebody just slaughtered that chicken in multiple ways and things and that and that. I would see that while eating that kind of like a something leg piece, I would kind of like a see that that leg piece actually belonged to a chicken, while that chicken was kind of like only going to somewhere else and things like that. So it just felt like that ki, like while I was eating, I was gonna realize that ki, no, this is a kind of like stuff that I'm eating is not good, because like basically I would kind of like a seen that thing entire kind of like a somebody the death scenarios actually happen in the chicken store. Like how does that particular guy who kind of like killed that chicken in so many ways and slaughtered that chicken in so many ways and things and that and that. And it kind of like a feel very terrified to me. Then probably the chicken would kind of like a really good, but still it doesn't want to eat that chicken. Like I don't want to be eat that chicken, because I just feel like that I was kind of like a monster, that kind of like a fun. I was eating a chicken for hunger. I was killing that chicken for hunger and things like that. And I would kind of like consider myself, no, it's really wrong and things like that. Then I might not gonna eat that chicken because, yeah. So yeah, these are kind of like a things. Like basically, if I kind of like eat something like a basically like a steak or lot of stuff, then probably I would kind of like imagine that where it came from and how that particular animal would slaughter in kind of like assembly these machines and stuff, and how they kind of like cut the meat and kind of like assembly. Yeah, like kind of like assembly imagine yourself that key, like there is a kind of like assembly meat is actually served on your plate. Okay, yeah, and suddenly you are try to eat that kind of like a meat, it kind of like look tasty, and then you realize that that meat is belong to the some person, a man. Okay, yeah, and you kind of like realize that that man is actually came from the Africa, and that man is kind of like a kill, and he actually slaughtered in machine, and the kind of like a meat that you are eating is not the meat of the animal, it's actually meat of man, a meat of a human thing, a kind of like somebody, a human flesh that you are eating. And literally just like that you just fuck this shit, dude. What the just can you imagine this thing, the scenario? It kind of like a shook, like basically they are kind of like a serving a human flesh. Oh my god. Like literally just like, do you realize this thing will gonna happen? So this is like a, yeah. So probably is this thing, if such thing will gonna happen, there are multiple good things will gonna happen. First good thing is that we will understand if the food is adulterate or not, because the way that we are living the life and way that the kind of like somebody human or human civilized are actually going through so many ways and things like that, foods are kind of like available in everywhere. Like basically is this thing na, like this civilization, like this century, we have so much amount of food and so much variable amount of food, that food is not even exist till the entire lifetime of human being. Nothing really at all. Like these are kind of like a food that we have. Now because of the food that we have and so many variation of the food that we have, it's kind of like something very easy to it's kind of like it's very hard to understand that ki the food that we are eating is kind of like a right food or wrong food or things like that. Now what is that right food and wrong food? Like right food is that ki whatever the food that you eat, like basically vegetable, veg, non-veg, yeah, like basically is this thing that ki okay, if you are kind of like a vegetarian, okay, if you are non-vegetarian, that is okay. Okay, yeah, because I think that now I am not a kind of like a particular person should supposed to be kind of like a preference that ki you should supposed to be eat the vegetable or you shouldn't supposed to be eat the non-vegetarian, things like that, because both are really essential for kind of like somebody evolved for the human civilization. Like basically meat and kind of like somebody those kind of like somebody eating chicken and mutton are kind of like somebody somewhat something add so much protein in your brain so that we would kind of like a think like a human brain and things like that. And kind of like a vegetables are kind of like a also really good too. Like both have their con and both have their kind of like a pros too. We just have to understand this thing. Okay, yeah. So it's not meant to be kind of like a somebody that key like eliminate the kind of like a one thing that I'm just kind of like a vegetarian and I will not gonna eat vegetarian. But still, is this thing na ki I shouldn't supposed to force you anything regarding about what you eat. It's up to you. It's up to your culture. It's up to your kind of like upbringing and things like that. Because I belong to the India, and in India there is a lot of things that people are not eat chicken, and which is true by the way. And I'm not kind of like somebody suggests you if they are not eating chicken, then okay, that is fine. Yeah, it's their choice and things like that. Okay, yeah. But I eat chicken, I eat mutton, but like these are kind of like a things like a chicken and mutton. If you kind of like somebody provide me such a thing like a basically or something kind of like a like I'm not gonna eat any kind of like some animal. No, probably not. I will not gonna eat that thing. Okay, yeah. But still, it's this thing that key like okay, yeah. But whatever, because of if such thing will gonna happen, basically if we could kind of like eat something and we would kind of like simply quickly understand its origin and things like that, we would gonna quickly understand that key is this kind of like a food or any kind of like adulterated, kind of like a simply grown on farms, or is it kind of like a flesh of animal, or is it kind of like a made in lab. So it's a kind of like a need to understand and things like that. But still, I like a couple of months ago I was kind of like simply watching a documentary, and in that documentary they kind of like made a meat in a lab. Yeah, they literally made a meat in a lab. It kind of like a taste exactly like meat, and they would have exactly like a kind of like all the minerals and things and that. It just kind of like felt really crazy. Like basically is this thing that na can we able to kind of like make our meat, which is make a meat. Literally it is kind of like I'm not really sure that kind of like a document is legit or not, but probably is this thing in the future we might kind of like somebody that we will kind of like invent such a food mechanism which kind of like somebody made in lab and things like that probably. Now, is it wrong to kind of like eat a kind of like a food in lab? Well, it's not wrong, but it's kind of like a things that na ki I think that na ki what do we supposed to be eat is not kind of like somebody stagnant. It's not kind of like somebody that ki like a written on stone and things like that. No, it's not. Like whatever the food that we are supposed to be eat, it should supposed to be kind of like a survival and things like that. Okay, yeah. And probably is this thing in the future we might have kind of like a food will kind of like somebody invented in a kind of like a labs or things like that. And which is true by the way, which is true, because it's not the kind of like a things that na ki we should always get kind of like some veggies, and we should always get kind of like some fresh kind of like a meat and things like that. I don't know. There are a lot of kind of like a rules and regulation will gonna come, and probably some kind of like a countries there is a kind of like a somebody violence is actually is this thing that ki if you wanted to eat steak is actually made from cow. Probably, I'm not really sure about that. But in India, you are not allowed to kind of like somebody cut the steak or kind of like cut the cow or things like that, because cow are kind of like somebody a very kind of like a religious thing. Okay, yeah, it's a kind of like a it kind of like a hurt lot of kind of like a somebody. Yeah, so basically in India, I'm not really sure. Maybe in some part of India might be there is a kind of like a things that they kind of like cut the cow and things like that. But still in India, almost like a maybe 90% cows are not actually cut for eat and things like that, nothing at all. But in US or in Europe, they are kind of like very much common there. Like they also cut the kind of like some pig and things like that. China is kind of like a way ahead of everyone. Okay, yeah, the Chinese people can eat anything. Like literally, they can eat like a scorpion, or I don't know what not they eat. Okay, yeah, but whatever. I shouldn't supposed to be judged regarding about anything what they should supposed to be eat and things like that. What I kind of like somebody, I just understand that key food are kind of like a somebody very essential thing. Because of the food, we are kind of like exist here. Because of the food, they are kind of like a give us purpose that what do we supposed to do and what do we supposed to not and things like that. And I think that it's kind of like somebody okay. In the future, we might kind of like eat something food which is kind of like a made up in lab and things like that. Now, like basically, it's up to you that should we supposed to eat such a food from lab or what. Now, I don't know. Probably in this, like basically the like I haven't really eat any kind of like a somebody food from lab, but probably is this thing that in the future we might gonna eat food from lab, and probably we should supposed to eat that thing because we don't have any choice and things like that. Why the food are actually gone? No, food are not actually going anywhere at all, but I don't know, yeah, dude. Like, okay, let me tell you one thing. What exactly is this thing now? Okay, these vegetarian, non-vegetarian, these are stuff are kind of like somebody exist for last 100 year. Okay, yeah, or maybe 200 year. Okay, yeah, like a 200 year vegetarian and non-vegetarian. These are kind of like concept what exist, but there are kind of like some new concept are kind of like established. Basically is this thing vegan. Okay, vegan food, seafood. These are there are a lot of kind of like some things that I should supposed to be eat vegan, I should supposed to be eat keto diet. Okay, yeah, these are kind of like a multiples of varieties of the foods and things like that. Now these are concept of the food are kind of like a somebody established in just kind of like a just last 20 or 25 year. Okay, yeah, like basically in 1900s, in 18s, these are kind of like a diet was not even exist, or maybe exist, but probably far less people will go know and things like that. What I kind of like suddenly realized that in the future we might have kind of like so many variation of the food and things like that. Like right now we have vegan food, right now we have kind of like a keto diet, we have kind of like somebody that's non-veg and veg and things like that. We also have kind of like a seafood and things like that. In the future we might have so many variation of food, so many. Now because of so many of variation of foods and things like that, which kind of like a simply creates kind of like a unique thing, like basically every people are kind of like wants to create a food as a kind of like art, and they wanted to make food with a kind of like a multiple substance and things and that. I'm not really sure what will gonna happen. Okay, yeah, but probably I think that in the future we also might gonna eat the food from which is actually came from lab and things like that. Probably, I think, I don't know, but this concept is really good. Like basically what if we could kind of like somebody imagine a kind of like a origin when we eat that particular stuff, which is kind of like a really good and things like that. Okay, yeah. By the way, regarding about food, I'm belong to the India, and basically is this thing in India there is a lot of kind of like a food adulteration is actually happened. Food safeties are also really essential, and Indian government are not actually kind of like emphasizing that much. Okay, yeah. Also regarding about serving the food, the way that kind of like somebody the people who kind of like serve the food very wrong way and things like that. um and sometimes it's kind of like somebody, yeah, it's not really good in every possible way, but still what I realized that ki, I don't know what was that kind of like a topic. I don't know. I should supposed to be end here. Sometimes I just kind of like forget what I'm saying. Whatever, this is, and this is just my opinion regarding about food and things like that. And thank you.